Visceral fat is not the fat you see when you look in the mirror. It is not the soft layer just beneath the skin that you can pinch with your fingers. It is deeper, more concealed, and far more dangerous. This fat is stored inside the abdominal cavity, wrapped around vital organs such as the liver, pancreas, and intestines. Because of its hidden location, many people underestimate its presence. A person may appear slim on the outside and still carry a significant amount of visceral fat internally. That is why it is often described as invisible risk. Unlike subcutaneous fat, visceral fat is metabolically active. This means it does not simply sit there as stored energy. It behaves almost like an endocrine organ, releasing hormones and inflammatory substances into the bloodstream. These chemical signals interfere with the body's natural balance. Over time, they increase inflammation, disrupt hormone regulation, and reduce insulin sensitivity. This is where the real danger begins. When visceral fat accumulates around the liver, it contributes to fatty liver disease. The liver plays a central role in regulating blood sugar and processing nutrients. If excess fat surrounds and infiltrates it, the liver's function becomes impaired. It begins to overproduce glucose and mismanage cholesterol levels. This sets the stage for type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease. The process is gradual, often silent, and may go unnoticed for years. The pancreas is another critical organ affected by visceral fat. The pancreas produces insulin, the hormone responsible for controlling blood sugar levels. When visceral fat increases, inflammatory compounds released from this fat interfere with insulin signaling. The body's cells become less responsive to insulin, a condition known as insulin resistance. As a result, the pancreas works harder to produce more insulin to compensate. Over time, this strain can exhaust pancreatic function, pushing the body closer to diabetes. The relationship between visceral fat and heart disease is equally concerning. Inflammatory chemicals released by visceral fat contribute to the buildup of plaque in arteries. These plaques narrow blood vessels and restrict blood flow. Elevated triglycerides, increased LDL cholesterol, and reduced HDL cholesterol often accompany high visceral fat levels. Together, these factors significantly raise the risk of heart attacks and strokes. Importantly, this risk exists even if overall body weight appears normal. Visceral fat also influences hormonal balance. It affects cortisol, the stress hormone, and can alter the regulation of appetite hormones such as leptin and ghrelin. This creates a cycle in which increased stress and poor appetite control promote further fat storage, particularly in the abdominal region. Sleep disturbances, chronic stress, and irregular eating patterns can worsen this cycle, allowing visceral fat to accumulate more easily. One of the most concerning aspects of visceral fat is that it can develop without dramatic outward signs. A person might not consider themselves overweight, but may still have an increased waist circumference. Waist measurement is often a more reliable indicator of visceral fat risk than body weight alone. Central obesity, fat concentrated around the abdomen, strongly correlates with metabolic disease. This is why two individuals with the same body mass index, BMI, can have very different health risks depending on where their fat is distributed. Age also plays a role. As metabolism slows and muscle mass decreases over time, the body becomes more prone to storing fat centrally. Hormonal changes, especially during midlife, can accelerate this shift. However, lifestyle factors remain the dominant driver. Sedentary behavior, frequent consumption of processed foods, excess sugar intake, and constant snacking all contribute to sustained high insulin levels, which favor visceral fat storage. The danger of visceral fat is not in how it looks, but in how it behaves. It promotes chronic low-grade inflammation, disrupts metabolic stability, and strains vital organs. It quietly increases the likelihood of developing diabetes, heart disease, fatty liver disease, and other metabolic disorders. Because it operates internally, many people remain unaware of the threat until routine blood tests reveal abnormal glucose, cholesterol, or liver enzyme levels. Understanding visceral fat shifts the focus from cosmetic concerns to metabolic health. The goal is not merely a flatter stomach, but a healthier internal environment. When strategies are applied that lower insulin levels, reduce inflammation, and improve metabolic flexibility, visceral fat becomes vulnerable. Its presence is not permanent. It responds to consistent lifestyle adjustments. But first, it must be recognized for what it truly is, not just excess weight, but a metabolically active tissue that significantly influences long-term health. Insulin is one of the most powerful hormones in the human body, and when it comes to fat storage, it plays a central role. To understand why visceral fat accumulates, we must first understand how insulin functions. Insulin is produced by the pancreas and released into the bloodstream primarily in response to rising blood glucose levels after eating. Its main job is to help transport glucose from the blood into the cells where it can be used for energy. Without insulin, blood sugar would remain dangerously elevated. In this sense, insulin is life-saving and essential. However, insulin does more than regulate blood sugar. It is also a storage hormone. When glucose enters the bloodstream after a meal, insulin signals the body to use what it needs immediately for energy. Any excess that is not used is stored. First, it is stored as glycogen in the liver and muscles. Once those storage sites are full, the remaining energy is converted into fat. This fat is then stored in adipose tissue, including visceral fat around the abdominal organs. This process is natural and necessary. The body evolved to store energy during times of abundance, so it could survive periods of scarcity. The problem arises when abundance is constant and scarcity never comes. In modern lifestyles, frequent meals, sugary beverages, refined carbohydrates, and constant snacking keep blood sugar elevated throughout the day. Each rise in blood sugar triggers insulin release. When this cycle repeats multiple times daily, insulin levels remain elevated for prolonged periods. Chronically high insulin levels create an environment that favors fat storage and prevents fat burning. When insulin is elevated, the body is in storage mode. It blocks the breakdown of stored fat, a process known as lipolysis. Even if a person reduces calories slightly, as long as insulin remains high, the body struggles to access its fat reserves efficiently. This is especially relevant for visceral fat, which is highly sensitive to hormonal signals. Over time, repeated insulin spikes can lead to insulin resistance. This condition develops when cells become less responsive to insulin's signal. As a result, the pancreas compensates by producing even more insulin to maintain normal blood sugar levels. This leads to a cycle of elevated insulin and worsening resistance. High insulin becomes the new normal. In this state, fat storage is continuously promoted, particularly in the abdominal region. Visceral fat and insulin resistance reinforce each other. As visceral fat accumulates, it releases inflammatory substances that further impair insulin signaling. The body becomes metabolically inefficient. Blood sugar regulation weakens. Energy levels fluctuate. Cravings increase. The individual may feel hungry more frequently, not necessarily because of true energy deficiency, but because unstable blood sugar drives appetite signals. It is important to clarify that insulin itself is not the enemy. It is essential for survival. The issue lies in chronic elevation without periods of decline. In a metabolically balanced system, insulin rises after meals and falls between meals. When insulin falls, the body shifts from glucose burning mode to fat burning mode. This shift allows stored energy to be accessed. If insulin rarely drops because food intake is continuous, the body never fully enters fat burning mode. The type of food consumed also influences insulin response. Highly processed carbohydrates and sugary foods tend to cause rapid spikes in blood glucose, leading to strong insulin surges. In contrast, meals balanced with protein, fiber, and healthy fats produce a slower, more controlled insulin response. Portion size and meal frequency also matter. Large meals and frequent eating both contribute to sustained insulin elevation. Stress and sleep also affect insulin. Chronic stress raises cortisol, which can increase blood sugar levels and indirectly stimulate insulin release. Poor sleep disrupts hormonal balance and reduces insulin sensitivity. Therefore, insulin regulation is not solely about food. It is part of a broader metabolic network influenced by lifestyle habits. When insulin levels are managed effectively, the body regains metabolic flexibility. This means it can efficiently switch between using glucose and fat for energy. Visceral fat becomes more accessible as a fuel source when insulin is allowed to decline for structured periods. This is why strategies that focus on insulin control, such as structured meal timing, reducing refined carbohydrates, improving sleep, and managing stress, can significantly impact abdominal fat. Understanding insulin transforms the conversation about weight and health. It shifts attention from simply counting calories to examining hormonal patterns. Fat storage is not merely a result of excess calories. It is strongly regulated by hormonal signals, especially insulin. When insulin is chronically elevated, fat storage is promoted. When insulin is balanced and allowed to fall appropriately, the body gains access to stored fat, including visceral fat. Therefore, controlling insulin is not about eliminating it or fearing it. It is about restoring rhythm. When insulin rises and falls in a healthy pattern, the body functions as designed. Energy is stored when needed and released when required. Visceral fat does not accumulate uncontrollably. Metabolic health improves. The key lies not in extreme measures, but in consistent habits that prevent insulin from remaining elevated all day long. Constant snacking may seem harmless. A biscuit with tea, a handful of chips while studying, a sugary drink between meals, or small bites throughout the day. These habits are often seen as normal, even healthy. Many people believe that eating frequently boosts metabolism or keeps energy levels stable. I didn't hormonei, especially insulin, a different picture emerges. Every time you eat, regardless of whether it is a large meal or a small snack, your body responds. Carbohydrates are broken down into glucose, which enters the bloodstream. Protein can also stimulate insulin release, though in a more moderate way. Even certain artificial sweeteners may trigger an insulin response in some individuals. The pancreas detects rising blood sugar and releases insulin to manage it. This is a natural and necessary reaction. The issue is not that insulin rises. The issue is that with constant snacking, insulin rarely has the opportunity to fall. In a balanced metabolic rhythm, Insulin rises after a meal and then gradually declines over the next few hours as the body uses the available energy. Once insulin drops to lower levels, the body transitions into fat burning mode. During this time, stored fat, including visceral fat, can be accessed and used for fuel. This switching between fed state storage mode and fasting state fat burning mode is a normal metabolic cycle. However, when snacks are consumed every 1 to 2 hours, this cycle is interrupted. Insulin rises repeatedly throughout the day. Before it has fully declined from the previous eating event, another spike occurs. The body remains in storage mode for extended periods. Fat burning is suppressed because insulin is a powerful inhibitor of lipolysis, the process by which stored fat is broken down. This pattern becomes even more problematic when snacks are high in refined carbohydrates or sugar. Foods like cookies, sweetened beverages, white bread, candy, and processed snack items cause rapid spikes in blood glucose. The sharper the spike, the stronger the insulin response. After the surge, blood sugar can drop quickly, sometimes leading to feelings of fatigue, irritability, or renewed hunger. This often prompts another snack, continuing the cycle. Over time, this frequent stimulation of insulin can reduce insulin sensitivity. Cells begin to respond less effectively to insulin's signal. To compensate, the pancreas releases even more insulin. Higher baseline insulin levels develop. The body becomes increasingly efficient at storing fat, but less efficient at burning it. Visceral fat, being highly responsive to hormonal signals, accumulates more readily in this environment. Constant snacking also disrupts hunger regulation. The hormones leptin and ghrelin control satiety and hunger signals. When eating is continuous, natural hunger cues can become blurred. People may eat not because of true physiological hunger, but out of habit, boredom, stress, or environmental triggers. This makes it difficult for the body to experience genuine fasting intervals, even short ones. Another consequence of frequent eating is digestive fatigue. The digestive system requires energy and blood flow to process food. When food intake is continuous, the body remains focused on digestion for most of the day. There is little opportunity for metabolic rest. Periods without food allow the body to shift resources towards cellular repair, fat metabolism, and improved insulin sensitivity. Constant snacking limits these restorative phases. Modern lifestyles encourage this pattern. Food is easily accessible at all times. Social environments revolve around eating. Marketing promotes grazing as healthy, yet from a hormonal perspective, constant intake maintains a persistently elevated insulin state. This environment is ideal for fat storage, particularly in the abdominal region. It is important to clarify that not everyone who snacks will develop metabolic problems immediately. Individual responses vary depending on genetics, activity levels, sleep quality, and overall diet composition. However, the underlying hormonal principle remains consistent. Each eating event triggers insulin, and repeated triggers prevent insulin from fully declining. Breaking the cycle does not necessarily require extreme fasting. Often, simply reducing unnecessary snacks and allowing structured gaps between meals can significantly improve insulin patterns. When meals are balanced with adequate protein, fiber, and healthy fats, they promote satiety and reduce the urge to snack frequently. Hydration and mindful eating also play a role in stabilizing appetite. When insulin is given time to fall between meals, the body regains metabolic flexibility. It learns to access stored energy rather than depending solely on incoming food. Visceral fat becomes more vulnerable because the hormonal environment shifts away from constant storage and toward periodic utilization. Constant snacking may seem small in isolation, but hormonally it has cumulative effects. It keeps insulin elevated. It reduces fat burning opportunities. It promotes a cycle of storage and hunger fluctuations. Understanding this mechanism shifts the focus from simply what we eat to how often we eat. When eating patterns align with natural hormonal rhythms, metabolic health improves, and the internal conditions that support visceral fat accumulation begin to weaken. High insulin does more than help glucose enter the cells. It actively determines whether the body stores energy or releases it. When insulin levels remain elevated, the body is locked in storage mode. This has a direct and powerful effect on fat metabolism. Even if a person reduces calories or increases exercise slightly, persistently high insulin can prevent the body from efficiently burning stored fat. To understand this clearly, we must look at how the body chooses its fuel source. The human body primarily runs on two fuels, glucose and fat. After eating, especially carbohydrates, glucose becomes the dominant fuel. Insulin rises to move glucose into cells and signal that energy is abundant. In this state, the body prioritizes using glucose and storing excess energy. Fat burning is temporarily paused because there is no immediate need to access stored reserves. This pause is normal and healthy after a meal. The problem arises when insulin does not fall back to low baseline levels. When insulin remains high for extended periods due to frequent eating, excessive refined carbohydrates, chronic stress, or insulin resistance, the body never fully transitions into fat burning mode. The biochemical process responsible for breaking down stored fat, called lipolysis, is directly suppressed by insulin. Lipolysis occurs when fat cells release stored fatty acids into the bloodstream to be used as energy. For this to happen efficiently, insulin levels must be low. High insulin sends a clear signal: energy is available, no need to burn stored fat. As long as that signal persists, fat remains locked inside fat cells. This includes visceral fat, which is particularly sensitive to hormonal regulation. Visceral fat has a high density of receptors that respond to hormonal signals, including insulin. When insulin is elevated, visceral fat is encouraged to store more energy. At the same time, its breakdown is inhibited. This creates a metabolic trap. The body continues storing fat but struggles to access it. Individuals may feel fatigued between meals because their bodies are not efficiently switching to fat as a fuel source. This often leads to increased hunger and more frequent eating, which further elevates insulin. Over time, chronically high insulin contributes to insulin resistance. Cells become less responsive to insulin's effects. As a result, the pancreas compensates by producing even more insulin to manage blood sugar. This leads to a cycle of hyperinsulinemia, persistently high insulin levels, which further blocks fat burning. Even when calorie intake is moderate, the hormonal environment favors storage over utilization. Exercise alone may not overcome this barrier if insulin remains elevated throughout the day. While physical activity improves insulin sensitivity and supports fat metabolism, the hormonal backdrop still matters. If meals and snacks are frequent and high in refined carbohydrates, insulin may stay elevated long enough to reduce the overall effectiveness of fat-burning processes. Another important factor is metabolic flexibility. A metabolically flexible body can easily switch between burning glucose after meals and burning fat between meals. High insulin interferes with this flexibility. The body becomes dependent on regular glucose intake and less capable of tapping into fat stores. This dependency often manifests as cravings, energy crashes, and difficulty going even short periods without eating. Nighttime metabolism also illustrates this concept. During sleep, when no food is consumed, insulin naturally declines. This is one reason overnight fasting supports fat metabolism. However, late night eating disrupts this pattern. If insulin remains elevated into the night due to heavy or carbohydrate-rich meals, the natural fat burning window during sleep is reduced. Over months and years, this pattern contributes to gradual fat accumulation, especially around the abdomen. It is important to emphasize that insulin is not harmful by nature. It is essential for life. The body requires it to regulate blood sugar and prevent dangerous spikes. The issue is not insulin itself, but the absence of hormonal balance. Insulin must rise and fall in a rhythmic pattern. When it rises appropriately after meals and declines between meals, fat metabolism functions properly. Lowering chronically high insulin levels does not require extreme measures. Reducing refined carbohydrates, limiting unnecessary snacks, prioritizing balanced meals, improving sleep, and managing stress all contribute to healthier insulin patterns. When insulin is allowed to fall, lipolysis resumes, stored fat becomes accessible, the body regains its ability to use internal energy reserves efficiently. When insulin remains high, fat burning is suppressed. When insulin is balanced and periodically low, fat burning becomes possible. This principle explains why some individuals struggle to lose abdominal fat despite efforts. Without addressing insulin patterns, the body remains in storage mode. Once insulin levels are stabilized and allowed to decline regularly, the biochemical barrier to fat burning weakens, and visceral fat becomes far more vulnerable to reduction.